Ready? Okay, we live? Okay. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. So far in our series, we have discussed a number of madhahib that existed, and we discussed the all four major ones. We only have two minor madhahib that don't exist really very much anymore. The first one is the Zahiri madhab. The Zahiri madhab is an interesting madhab, and the founder of this school was Imam Dawood al-Zahiri. Imam Dawood ibn Ali was his name, and he was born in the year 815. He studied under the students of Imam al-Shafi'i, and he later joined the halaqah of Imam Ahmad, who was also a student of Imam al-Shafi'i. He continued to study there until he was expelled from his classes because he held a view which was and is considered a incorrect view, but he didn't just have an opinion, but he was like, must have been going around talking about it, spreading fitna among others, wallahu alam. But basically, he was expelled from his circle, and the view that he had was, it's somewhat of an advanced aqeedah issue, which is that he said that the Quran was muhdath. The Quran was a new existence. Okay, so as opposed to a term that is used, which is qadim, which is old existence. But anyways, I don't want to go into a lot of detail there. After his expulsion, he took an independent path of reasoning based on a principle, and his principle was that the Quran and the Hadith, they have to be taken literally. They have to be taken literally. And there should be no interpretation that is done. Okay? So to give you an example of this, and this is a view that's somewhere out there in the books of Fiqh, which is that let's say that you gave a person, let's say you had to give your zakah, and your zakah came out to be a 1 pound brick of gold, let's say. That was your zakah. So if you were to put your 1 pound of gold brick in a bag of flour, and you went and you gave it to a poor person, and that person basically takes it from you, so your zakah has been given. But then that person says, hey, you know what, I want to give this back to you. Would you like to buy it from me? So you say, okay, well, for how much would you like to buy? So he says, well, I'll buy it for $5. It's just a bucket, it's just a bag of flour, right? So you buy the bag back for the price of what is apparent, because what's inside you cannot see. So if you buy it back, then you have fulfilled your zakah, and you got back something which is legally yours. Okay, basically, it's in some cases literally it can be misunderstood, right? So, for example, one of these strange opinions out there is that the Prophet ﷺ said that when you are to marry someone, you can look at her. You can look at her. Okay? So now, what do you think can you look at? Can you look at a woman without her hijab on? Can you look at her in her home clothes? Can you look at anything else? Okay? So what would the Zahiri madhab say about this? The Prophet said, you can look at her. Okay, and this is of course a very, very bizarre opinion, which is something that the vast majority, almost all of the scholars have rejected, that obviously do not use that usul. And they say, of course, what is reasonable is that you can see her with her hijab on. So you could see her face. You can see her hands. And more than that, there is, it's really very, it gets into very, very murky waters. There are some opinions that say that if you again, I don't want to go into that issue, that's not our issue today, but basically maybe a little bit more, maybe that you could see her feet. Some of the scholars have said that the Prophet ﷺ said that you should marry women who will give you a lot of children. But how can you tell if you are, let's say you are in your 20s and you're marrying a girl who is a few years younger than you, and let's say that she doesn't have any family or anything like that you can tell, sometimes there are cases like that, how would you be able to tell or even determine in the past days if this woman is able to give a lot of children to you? And in the past, they said that they used to be able to see the hands in some sort of way that it would give them an indication of the fertility of a person. And they used to have these type of things. If you remember, we talked about with regards to Usama bin Zayd and Zayd ibn Haritha, that there was a man who came and he saw their feet together, and he saw that these feet are from the other feet. The only thing he saw was the feet, but he was able to tell that these feet are related to each other. And there was a controversy around the relationship between them. And this person came and he said this. So they used to have these different type of things. So some of the scholars have said that, something which is reasonable, but definitely not a lot more than that. But in this case, it would be basically, if you're going with a literal opinion, then you can obviously do that. Of course, his madhab basically died out. And most scholars, they do not say that the Quran is to be taken literally, which means, for example, so I'll give you a simpler example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. Don't say uff to your parents. Okay? Now, all of the mufassirin have said that the uff is the least expression of disgust and frustration with your parents, so you're not supposed to do that with your parents. So the Zahiri school would say that you cannot say uff, but you can say anything else. Okay? Because he said, look, we have to interpret it literally. Okay? So, but this was his opinion, and he had a madhab, and he had his own usul. He basically gave some credence to the ijma of the Sahaba, if the Sahaba all agreed on something. And of course, qiyas, he did not really like qiyas, because qiyas is a type of interpretation. But he did have something called, he had a principle, which was called mafhum, that, okay, what is the understood meaning of this? Like, what is implied by this? So this was basically a type of qiyas, even though he did not like qiyas. Now, due to the very limited scope, and this usul is very hard for a lot of people to accept, because there are so many ways that it's completely changing the spirit of Islam. So there were not a lot of people who really followed this madhab, and also definitely not a lot of scholars or students that wanted to follow this. So it did not last very long. In fact, it did not take a foothold in any area of the Muslim world during the lifetime of Imam Dawood, nor in the century and a half after him. However, in the 11th century, a brilliant Spanish scholar, who all of us have probably heard about, he actually was a student of this madhab, and he basically revived this entire madhab. And the name of this student is Ibn Hazm, Ali ibn Ahmad ibn Hazm al-Andalusi. So he was in the Muslim Spain, and he died 1070 CE. So about, you could say, 4th century after the Prophet ﷺ. And Ibn Hazm revived this madhab and defended it in the numerous works that he wrote. And he basically popularized the madhab because he was such a prolific scholar. Like today, if you have someone who's very famous and very well liked by people, so even if they have some strange opinion on some matters, they end up becoming popular among the people. If that person, for example, if this famous person and very well-liked person, if he always has 3 pens in his pocket, for example, you will start to see people walking around with 3 pens in their pocket. Okay, it's that level. So basically, Ibn Hazm, he made this madhab become popular again, and it flourished in Spain, and also from there it spread to areas of North Africa and elsewhere. However, when the Spanish Empire of the Muslims crumbled, then this madhab also disappeared, and all that is left behind for the most part are the scholarly writings. Most of them were by Ibn Hazm. Then we have another small madhab which is by the famous scholar Imam al-Tabari, right? This is called the Jariri madhab because his name was Muhammad ibn Jarir ibn Yazid al-Tabari. And he was born in Tabaristan in 839 CE. And he was a very, very smart student. He studied hadith, fiqh, and history. And he traveled around and he studied the systems of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and Imam Shafi'i. And for the first 10 years, after his return from Egypt, he strictly followed the Shafi'i madhab. Okay, so he went to Egypt, he studied there, came back, and he continues to study to be a Shafi'i for 10 years. But then at the end of that period, he founded a school of his own, whose followers called themselves Jariris. And his madhab fell comparatively quickly into oblivion. Okay, basically, for different reasons, as we talked about before, that sometimes the most important reason for a madhab to spread what used to be that the students of that madhab would become prominent judges, and they would appoint more judges under them, and then it would start to basically get adopted and grow from there. So Ibn Jarir, although his madhab is gone, his fiqhi madhab is gone, however, he left behind a great legacy of knowledge that all of us, whether we know it or not, have benefited from at some point. Does anybody know any famous works of Imam Jarir al-Tabari? Ibn Jarir al-Tabari? He has a tafsir, right? So the tafsir al-Tabari, which is actually officially called Jami' al-Bayan. And what else? Any other work you have heard about? So there's Tafsir al-Tabari and there is Tarikh al-Tabari. Tarikh is history. So he wrote a massive book on all that he could collect on the topic of history up until his time, basically. Again, everything that he could collect, he put it there. And now most of the stories that we hear about the prophets, they come from the works of Ibn Kathir and the works of Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari. But one thing to keep in mind is that while these are great books, these books, again, they have an advanced complication in them. The advanced complication in them is that these books are not written for an average person who has no basic knowledge of Islam. So you can still pick it up and you can still benefit from it. But their intention was to collect all they could and leave it for other people so that other people could then benefit from it in different ways. So what they did is that they collected everything they could find, including but quite a few weak narrations. Also, they collected and they reported anything that they could find from the Israelite traditions to add to the details of the stories of the prophets. They put that there as well. Now, there's nothing wrong with it, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that if they're not contradicting the Quran and Sunnah, then you can mention them as additional detail. However, we're not supposed to base our halal and haram, we're not supposed to base our matters of aqidah based on that. Okay? So there are some issues that have crept into the Islamic tradition from these reports, which are now becoming problematic. Okay? Because remember that we believe that the Quran and the Sunnah, that which is authentic, can never contradict science. And science can never contradict the authentic Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and the authentic Sunnah. Right? Now, sometimes we do read something in our books and we say, oh, it doesn't make sense. So for example, a famous case of this is that what was the size of Adam alayhi salam when he came to earth? Who can tell us? 32? 32 cubits? Did you say cubits? Yeah, it's actually 60 cubits tall. Okay, 60 cubits tall. So now the report says that Adam alayhi salam and all of his children basically, they were basically big size. And over time, the size became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay? Now, some of the modern scholars, they have done a lot of research into this, and they have said that this report is not something that's coming to us from the Quran or from the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And what the Prophet ﷺ said is that Adam's height was 60 cubits tall, and that it was referring to his size in Jannah, not on earth. Okay, because now science has said that, hey, we have skeletons of early humans, okay, going back 250,000 years. And between all of them, we have not found any human skeletons which are taller on average than our size now. In fact, they found them to be shorter. I think like just a tiny bit shorter, but not taller. Okay, and the thing is that if we have found those humans all over the earth, then what could it be? What could be the case? And also, science has told us that the human body, as we know it, it cannot get too much bigger with this same shape. So I don't know if you know that some very, very tall people, throughout the history, there have been some people that have genetic defects where their body doesn't stop growing in size. So some of them, they have grown up to be 10 feet tall, okay? But every single one of them, they have had major health problems and they have died very young. And they are often not able to walk because they are so tall. Their legs are not able to sustain the weight and the structure. The structure has to be, it needs strength, which it doesn't have. And that the heart is not capable, if it's just one heart, it's not capable of pumping blood to such far distances. Okay? So scientifically, it is very difficult. It is not difficult. It is impossible to have the same type of body as a human being, but get bigger in size. So that's why if you look at animals like elephants, giraffes, they can get big, but their body sizes, their body style is different than ours. Okay? Same thing with dinosaurs. We have dinosaur bones and stuff like that, but their body style is different than the human body style. So anyways, the point that I was trying to make is that sometimes when we hear these type of reports, generally speaking, if they are going completely head-to-head against science, then it is sometimes the case that they are not coming to us from authentic Quran and authentic Hadith. Sometimes they are a statement of a companion who may have been a student of a person who used to be Jewish or Christian before. So they studied with them, they became Muslim, then they said that our teacher taught us this. But that teacher was also telling them what he learned from Islam, and he was also telling them what he learned from Christianity before. He said, you know what, this is what Islam says, and before I became Muslim, in the books of Christians, it says this. Now, the next person that reports it skips those details and just says this about Isa alayhi salam or about Adam alayhi salam. So those are things that we need to keep in mind. Now, that basically covers the major madhahib that existed. Now, out of all of these madhahib that we have discussed so far, about maybe 8 or 9 of them, out of them, only 4 continue to exist today. And we may have some remnant opinions of other schools and other scholars. However, basically the 4 schools became dominant in our time as we know them. Now, the next topic that we need to discuss is that, okay, again, this is something that confuses a lot of regular people. They say that, hey man, I'm so confused. Why is there a Hanafi opinion? Why is there a Maliki opinion? Why can't they all just agree with each other? Why can't they all just agree with each other? So the reason for the disagreement, there are a few key principles, you could say, which, or a few key issues which cause disagreement. So I'll share with you some examples of them. Number 1 is the meaning of a word, the meaning of a word, okay? So I'll give you an example of this, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the word qur or quru, referring to the waiting period of a divorced woman. Okay, thalathata quru, 3 periods. Now, does that mean that it is, so let's say that a woman is divorced on the 1st of January. Okay? Now, when she was divorced, on that day, she was in a time of purity and not the time of menses. Okay? So, does that mean that there have to be 3 periods of menses, or there have to be 3 periods of purity? Okay? So, what that does is that it causes some disagreement among the scholars. So that's why some of the scholars say that she has to have 3 periods of menses. And some of them said that if she's in her purity period right now, so that's number 1, then after the next period of menses, she will have a second period of purity. Then she will have a period of menses. Then she will have her third period of purity. And when that starts, it could be that, okay, 3 periods of purity are complete, and she could be free from her waiting period. Now that means she can remarry. Other scholars said, well, is it the beginning or the end? Is it the period of menses or the period of purity? So that's where basically the different opinions are there. And of course, what a person should do is that in order to avoid all doubt, a person should not remarry until the safe period has arrived, meaning whichever is the longest period, waiting period, which would, in this case, it would be a difference of how much? Maybe about 30 days of disagreement, okay? So it's better to make sure that you're not in a doubtful area where somebody can then come and say, hey, this marriage is not valid, okay? Also, sometimes, another example of this is the word yad, okay? Yad in Arabic can mean your hand, and it can also mean your arm, okay? It can also mean your arm. So now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that when it's time, when you need to make tayammum, then famsahu biwujuhikum wa aydikum, that you wipe your face and your aydikum, your hands. Okay, now, the word yad that is used here, is it talking about the hand or is it talking about the whole arm? The word is similar for both. Okay, the same word can be used for both depending on context. So some of the scholars, they say that tayammum is that you touch the clean earth, you wipe your face, and you wipe your hands, and your tayammum is done. Some of the scholars say that no, you touch clean earth, you wipe your face, and you touch it again. I believe in both cases, you touch it again. And then you wipe your hands up to your elbows, just like in wudu, and then your tayammum is done. Okay, so what's the reason for this agreement here? Same word that has two different meanings. Sometimes the issue is literal or figurative. Okay, literal or figurative. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that one of the things that breaks your wudu is touching women. Touching women. Okay, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ. What does touching mean? What do you think it means? What is that? Literally touching a woman, okay? So that is actually, so the Zahiri madhab will tell you that if you were handing a cup of water to your mother and you touched her hand, your wudu broke. Okay? The Shafi'i madhab says that you touch any non-mahram woman, like you go to the cashier, you're handing money, and while she's giving you some change or something like that, your hand just tiny little bit touched, your wudu broke. Okay? Others, they said that no, it is only when you touch with desire. So again, what type of touch is it? Is it a literal touch, or is it a metaphorical, or it is intended to be a type of touch which is more than just a casual touch or accidental touch, but rather it is a touch with desire. Same thing, by the way, with regards to a person touching their private part. That there's some disagreement. There are two ahadith, so in one, so the scholars, they say that basically if a person touches their private part accidentally while they're taking a shower and they were in the state of wudu, then it does not break their wudu. But if a person touches with any type of desire, then in that case it would it would break their wudu as well. Also, sometimes the disagreement is based out of grammatical meaning. Okay, so for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says with regards to fasting, ثُمَّ أَطِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ, and complete the fast up to the night. Okay, now what does it mean? We all obviously follow that as soon as night begins, our fast is over. Okay, but the grammatical meaning, if we were to take that and not the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, somebody could argue that wait, it is not the beginning of the night, it is up to the night, which means that until the end of the night. Okay, so you can imagine that it would make things very difficult. Also, so there are different examples of this that are mentioned here, which we don't need to go into detail. Now, one of the biggest reasons is the narrations of a hadith that were used. Okay, now when we say the Quran is only one. Okay, for there is hardly any disagreement with regards to the wording of the Quran. There can be interpretation, but the words are one. But when it comes to hadith, there are multiple issues with regards to the usage of hadith in the issuing of fatwa, okay, in the issuing of opinions of the madhab. Number one issue is the availability of hadith, which was, remember we talked about that there were some scholars who were in Iraq, there were some scholars who were in Hijaz, and there was a time when traveling was not being done actively in order for the pursuit of hadith, and they were not being combined. So there was basically a difference of, you could say a huge, Grand Canyon, right? That you could not cross. What exists here may not exist here, and what exists here may not exist here. Up until later scholars came, and they maybe grew up in Hijaz, they collected everything from here, and then they went to Iraq, and they collected everything from there, and then they compiled it in one book, which they made it available here and available here. Okay? Up until that happened, you basically have this group of scholars relying on a hadith and giving their fatwa on that, while they are missing a direct hadith on that topic, which the scholars on this side are relying on. But they are not able to communicate easily, so that's why there's a difference of opinion on that matter. The second issue is the weakness or the weak narrations of hadith, right? Remember we talked about that there were some scholars who were so afraid of using a weak narration. They said that if we don't have a strong, authentic narration, then we are going to use ijtihad. We're going to basically use analogy and come up with a solution for that problem based on the authentic hadith that we do know and principles that we have learned from that. We will give a fatwa because we cannot rely on this weak hadith. There was another group of scholars, they said, no, I prefer a weak hadith over my own intellect. Okay? Different points of view, both of them have their own justification. However, as a result, you may have some opinions. And by the way, this is a very important thing to keep in mind, is that whenever you see someone praying a little bit different than you, the standard response is, oh, they must not know anything, what they're talking about. We got all the knowledge, right? But it is actually possible that we might be the ones who are practicing a practice which was based on a weak hadith because of the absence of an authentic hadith. But now that the authentic hadith is available, what should a person do? A person knowingly, once they know this, they should not continue to follow something which is against an authentic hadith. So, and this is something that, the Imams themselves, they said that, hey, what we are doing, we're doing our best as to what we have. But if you find something authentic that we couldn't find, then follow that and throw my opinion on the wall. Then, remember we also talked about that even with authentic hadith, the different Imams, they had different conditions because there was a time of fabrication of hadith, so they had different conditions. Anybody remember one of the conditions that any of the madhahib had with regards to accepting hadith? Yeah, so the Hanafi opinion, Hanafi usul was that it has to be an authentic hadith as well as a well-known hadith. Because somebody could fabricate a chain. Okay, so let's say that I come and I tell you that a very, very trustworthy brother, let's say that it is the most trustworthy person that you could think of, and I tell you, hey, I just came from his house and he told me that such and such person is, a bad person. Now, the chain sounds so good, right? But if the person says, hey, where did you hear that person say it? Well, he was at a wedding and we were sitting at a table with maybe 10 people there. So how come there's only one person narrating this and no one else? Okay? So they would say that we need to make sure that it is also well known that multiple people in each generation have heard it as well in order for us to base something important on it. So that was the condition of mashhur, that it has to be well known. The Malikis, as you know, that they had the opinion, the condition that it has to agree with the practice of the people of Medina, right? Because Imam Malik said that if the Prophet was practicing something regularly, it is not possible that it has been forgotten among the people of Medina at the time that he was alive in. So it could be an authentic hadith, but if the people of Medina didn't know about it and were not practicing it, then Imam Malik would not have accepted that, and thus he might have a fatwa which may go directly in the face of an authentic hadith, but they did not accept it because They were not trying to be, na'udhu billah, careless. They were being extra careful. They were being extra careful because of the fitna that existed at the time of people fabricating a hadith. Now, another issue with regards to hadith is resolutions of textual conflict in hadith. Resolutions of textual conflict. So, for example, there's an authentic hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ forbade salah at certain times. He said, no salah after Fajr prayer until the sun has risen, and after Asr prayer until the sun has set. At the same time, there are other authentic hadith in which certain salahs were recommended without time restriction. For example, if you enter a masjid, the Prophet said, if any one of you enters a masjid, he should pray 2 rak'at before sitting down. So now, what should a person do who enters the masjid after Salatul Asr? In one hadith, the Prophet said, don't pray anything after Asr. There's no salah after that. In one hadith, the Prophet said that don't sit down until you pray 2 rak'at when you come in the masjid. So now, if a person enters after Asr or after Fajr, what should he do at that time? What do you think? Stay standing if you are just a few minutes, right? If you want to not violate any of them, and you just came in like 2 minutes before Maghrib, just don't sit down. That's one way where you would practice both of them. Or other scholars have said that no, in this case, you can sit down because this is basically the Hanafi position, which is that there is no salah after Fajr and Asr. So if you come 10 minutes after Asr and you still have an hour left until Maghrib, you just come, you sit down, you do your prayers and whatever, no problem. Imam Malik is also of the same opinion. Some of the other scholars, they said no. What the Prophet meant was that if you are in the masjid, you prayed, you're sitting down, you're making dhikr, don't get up and keep praying 2 rak'at, 2 rak'at, 2 rak'at for no reason. But this prohibition does not apply to a prayer when there is a reason for it. So for example, they said that if the sun becomes eclipsed 10 minutes after Fajr, when are you supposed to pray the eclipse prayer? When there is an eclipse, right? So you're going to say, oh, we are not going to pray this eclipse prayer. So they say this is an example that shows us that if there is a reason, such as if you just came to the masjid, now this is a reason to pray 2 rak'at, so you pray 2 rak'at. Now subhanAllah, they had their opinions, but there is a famous case where Imam Malik, he was of the opinion as well, that you do not pray after Asr. Even Tahiyyatul Masjid, you do not pray. So one day, Imam Malik came in the masjid, and there was a young boy who must have read like one book in Fiqh. And he was, didn't know who he's talking to. He sees an old man come and sit inside the masjid without praying 2 rak'at. So this young boy, he says to the old man, who he doesn't know is Imam Malik, the Imam of Medina. He says, brother, uncle, whatever, don't you know that the Prophet said, don't sit down until you pray 2 rak'at? So Imam Malik, he got up and he prayed 2 rak'at. And their students were like, whoa, what's happening here? Did the Imam just change his fatwa? We need to write this down. We need to ask what new evidence came to you that you changed your opinion. So when he finished praying, they said, Ya Imam, Ya Shaykh, did you change your opinion? You taught us that no, we don't pray, we sit down. And now you prayed. He said, no, I did not change my opinion. However, when he told me to get up and pray, I was afraid that if I don't pray, then I will be among the people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ ارْكَعُوا لَا يَرْكَعُونَ. That when it is said to them to bow down in front of Allah, they don't bow down, they refuse to do so. So he said, I didn't change my opinion, but I didn't want to be among that if someone is telling me point blank to pray, and I say, no, I'm not going to pray. So one of the things that it shows us that the Imams themselves, they have this, they understand that these are opinions, and there is, if you end up following this or you end up following that, it is not the end of the world. And once in a while, if you follow the other opinion, there's no harm in that. There's no harm in that. Once in a while, in a situation like this, where Allah is not looking at technical violations, but Allah is looking at how eager are you to please Him. And here, He says, in this case, let it be the day that I follow the other opinion, that in case on the day of judgment I find out that I was wrong all along, at least one day I did the right thing. Okay, so whatever madhahib, whatever opinions we follow, we should not become so hard and fast in that we become basically like a rock that cannot move, right? And I gave you this example with regards to divorce, is that there are lenient opinions with regards to issues of divorce, and there are stricter opinions with regards to issues of divorce. And in our situation, I've dealt with many cases like this, and even Imams themselves who have the stricter opinion that they follow, they say, take this person to such and such Imam who has lenient opinions. Perhaps this family can stay together. Okay? I cannot give him that fatwa because that's not the one that I follow. But take him to that person. If he gives it to him on his authority and this family can get together, then, at least it will be easier for this family. So this is the right way, which is that, yes, you have an opinion, you have a standpoint, that you stance, but you don't necessarily are going to become like so hard, like there's complete inflexibility in that. Because remember, we said that at the end of the day, these are ijtihadat. These are scholars trying their best to arrive at the truth. So, of course, a person cannot do that when there's a direct, and when there is no difference of opinion among the scholars, and if there's a direct prohibition, then if somebody tells you to do something, then you don't do it at that time. Okay? But if there is a difference of opinion, then in that case, once in a while, it may be useful for that. Okay, and lastly, two last things is that reasons for disagreement. Number one is admissibility of certain principles. Remember, we said that they had different principles. Some of them they accepted. The Imam Malik, he said, the people of Medina, what they are doing is important. And some of them, they basically had the rule of istihsan or istihbab, istislah. Also, they had different methods of drawing analogy, how you can draw an analogy. So basically, these were the different reasons for why there are difference of opinions. So inshallah, when we start to study fiqh, when we actually start to go through issues, then when you hear an issue that you have never heard about before, there's no reason to get up and start attacking. There's no reason to get up and start fighting. But that is somewhere where a person says, okay, I always put my hands on such and such place, and here the Imam is saying that you put your hands on such and such place. So let me make a note to myself. I need to go and study this issue further. Easy and simple. Okay? And after you go and you study, you might come across and you might read some stuff that might actually help you. You can go and ask, maybe this Imam is telling you to do this, and there's another Imam who is still accessible to you, was telling you to do something else. So what you can do is you can go and ask him, said, Imam, I heard something, and by the way, it's not good manners to put two Imams or scholars against each other. So you don't go to Imam X and say, excuse me, Imam X, Imam Y said you're wrong. You don't do that. But you just say that Imam X, I heard from someone such and such. What is your take on this matter? Okay, because it's not good manners, good etiquette. Sometimes I may have some disagreement with someone, but I respect that person. And if you publicly stand up and ask me to contradict him, you're putting me in a very difficult spot, right? One day a young brother came up to me and he said that my teacher and whose teacher was there, my teacher says you can't do such and such. So And his teacher was looking at me as to what am I going to say. So I took him to the side. First I told him, I'll talk to you later. I am busy right now. And then later on I told him that, hey, since he's your teacher, you are in his class, even if it's allowed or not allowed, just listen to your teacher. Okay, there's no need for you to go in there and say, no, you're wrong and I'm going to do such and such. But, my opinion is such and such. However, this is your teacher. You need to listen to your teacher as long as you're in his class. So don't put, different scholars against each other, but you can research and say, look, there's another opinion that I heard about, and this is the evidence they are citing. What are you saying about this? So now we move on to the next stage, and this is an important stage, which is basically the stage of consolidation. So up until now, you could say that the fiqh is basically growing, okay? But once you reach a peak, what happens is plateau. And after the plateau, it starts to go down, okay? So this is the stage, the fifth stage, where there is what we call, in nice words, we call it consolidation, which is they're not growing anymore. They are basically internally organizing, developing within what's already there, not going any further, okay? So this is at the end of the the end of the Abbasid era, from 950 CE until about 1259. So that's the last 300 years. Okay, you remember the Abbasids, they ruled for about 400 plus years. So after the first 100 years, which is the golden age, after that, the golden age starts to become a plateau where they're not growing anymore. Okay? And what happened at the end of the Abbasids? Who remembers? Who can tell us how did the Abbasids disappear? The Mongols, right? And you can imagine, you can understand that if the Muslim Ummah is doing so good, it is hard to imagine an enemy can destroy them one after another. But what was happening is that after they reached the golden age in the first 100 years, they became, you could say, comfortable, so they stopped growing. They stopped innovating in terms of the worldly matters. They stopped thinking about new ways of finding solutions to existing problems. When that happens, slowly you start to, time is such a thing that if you're not constantly growing, you're automatically becoming outdated. Okay, like let's say that today you master everything you can about computer technology. But if you stop learning from today onwards, within 1 or 2 years, you're going to become old school. Within a few more years after that, you're going to become a dinosaur. And a few years after that, new stuff will come out, and you will have no understanding of how this system works. Okay? So this is the reality that unfortunately happened with regards to the last 300 years of the Abbasid era. So what happens in this time is that a strange issue starts. And by the way, we're going to show a video now. Are we ready for that? Okay. So in a few minutes. So what happens is that they start to have debates with each other. So for entertainment of the Khalifa, he brings a Shafi'i scholar and he brings a Hanafi scholar, and they put an issue in between them and they say, okay, fight over it. Okay? Now, initially, of course, it would have been respectful, but it is not really being done for the sake of arriving at truth. It is done in order to create entertainment for the Khalifa, for the people that are there to watch. So of course, if you are there, you have been invited to come and debate a scholar, what are you going to do? You're going to go to deliver punchlines, right? You're going to try to win at any cost. You don't want to be embarrassed in front of all the people that are there. So at some point, it becomes less about arriving at the truth and more about a victory of a performance. I don't know if you remember, but in the 2016 election, when all the Republican campaigns were coming up and Trump kept going up and up and up and up in polls. So Marco Rubio was not doing good. So his people told him that, hey, you need to go in there and you need to deliver some punches to Trump. And basically every time there was a debate, right after that there was a poll, and it showed who was winner of that debate. And he went in there and he made fun of Donald Trump, he delivered some punchlines and whatnot, and his numbers went up. But then the next day, he said, you know what? I'm glad that I'm doing better, but that's not the type of campaign that I want to run. I don't like it. Right? So this is unfortunately what happens. And up until today, by the way, public debates are generally not a very positive thing, generally speaking, because a lot of times it becomes more of a theater than actually wanting to learn the truth. And I will show you some videos of some modern day debates where you're like, wait, are these people discussing issues of deen in order to come closer to Allah? Or are they in a wrestling, the ring of the martial arts, when two people enter the ring? One person has to knock the other person out or make them submit in order to walk out of there as a victor. So that's exactly what it looks like. So I'll show you this debate that's taking place in Pakistan. Okay. And there are many such places, places that this stuff takes place. Okay, where is it? Don't worry, you don't have to understand. Just look at the body language. He says, if you prove me wrong, I will give you 500,000 rupees. And he said, I will write for you that I lost.
अल्लाह को जवाब देना है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह दुनिया देखेगी और फकीर की पेशेन को नोट करो इस मुनाजरा से लोग धड़ाधड़ अहले हदीस होंगे और सुनते जाओ हदीस से अभी हुमैद का जवाब नहीं आया इब्राहिम मौलाना मतीउल्लाह जामिया मोहम्मदिया आ जाना फकीर तुझे 5 लाख रुपए इनाम देगा शिकस्त लिख दूंगा
So they're chanting, their school of thought. They're like Zindabad and, these type of things. So now think about if you're sitting on the other side, if you see whether he's right or wrong, if you see that type of attitude, does it make you want to follow that? It doesn't. It makes you dig in even more, okay? I'll show you one more, which is in English. This is a very funny guy to me. I find him to be very, very comical. In terms of the way that he behaves, and he does a lot of these debates. That's his claim to fame, that he goes and he challenges people for debates. So this is in England, and this is a Barelvi scholar, and this is a Deobandi scholar, which are basically they're both Hanafi, but they have certain differences between them.
A request for Maulana Uthman is firstly that we agree on 3 things, one of 3 things, meaning we agree on all 3. Firstly, I want you to introduce yourself because you made the challenge. You are the mudda'i. And once you have introduced yourself, to tell me who you represent from the ulama of Deoband in the UK, Darul Uloom Bari or any other significant Deobandi institute in the UK. Secondly, I want you to confirm or deny whether you are debating me with the rules and regulations of the Nizami syllabus book, which is Al-Munadharatul Rashidiyya, which is this book which we all study. This is taught in Darul Uloom Deoband and it is taught in other Darul Ulooms. And thirdly, we will go on to your da'wah, your claim. And that is when we will discuss everything else. So please proceed with those.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyil ummiyil kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in amma ba'd. First and foremost, before we proceed with anything you've asked for, can we fix a time for these conditions to finish?
If you want. How long do you want?
So for this, you suggest something and I will give you my opinion on it. If you want mine,
I can go on all night.
No, I can go on all night as well.
Because you requested a time, I want you to propose your time.
Okay. So for this, because you asked me,
Now, just look at their body language. Does it look like two people that are there to kind of basically saying, you know what, brother, I want to learn from you. Maybe I'm wrong. Just the body language alone, you can see how antagonistic it is.
I will seek mashwara.
There is no mashwara, because the very first condition is no one else is allowed to interject.
So if you want me to give you the time, first and foremost, I demand that in terms of speaking, me and you should have equal time to speak.
Of course, that's no problem.
Okay. Just like in a debate, there is equal time to speak. In conditions of the debate, there should also be equal time to speak.
That's fine.
Okay. Now, second thing I request is that the opening speech should be mine. Okay? You can take the closing one. In these 2 hours, okay, I should be speaking for 1 hour, you should be speaking for 1 hour. No, our speaking time.
He challenges someone who is an equal to him.
Yep.
Yes? That would, someone makes a claim.
Yep.
And challenges another person to a debate.
Yep.
When they challenge another person in a debate, in Munazara Rashidiyya, if you remember your classes, they mention that the one who makes the claim, he challenges someone who is an equal to him.
Yep.
Yes? That would mean familiarity on the side of the challenger. So you are obviously familiar with who I am.
Okay.
Yes?
No. Let me just clarify one thing.
No, you're not.
Asrar, let's clarify one thing.
Are you familiar with
Can we clarify one thing, please? Yeah? And for this, I'd like my first time to start. And
I haven't agreed on that yet. I've given you
can you please agree with... See, now, you're jumping from topic to topic. Anybody who calls a Deobandi a Maulana has become a kafir. So Asrar Rashid has called me Maulana. Bismillah.
I'm not playing games here.
They got in a fight.
A simple question. He can't answer it. Because he can't answer it, he's hiding his ignorance. If he just points out, is he mu'allil or mani'? Are you mu'allil or mani'?
Are you a Muslim?
Oh my God. Is this your graduate? Ya jahil admi.
He asked him, are you Muslim? He said, are you mudda'i or not? Make your claim. He said, are you Muslim or not? He said, look at him. So basically, there's a lot of theater in this type of stuff, but the actual arriving at truth, it doesn't happen in this way. The way that happens is very, very different from this. By the way, this person, he went and he debated another Imam, and he disagreed with him, obviously. That's why he was debating him. So he started off by saying, Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda. Okay? So this Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda is what Musa alayhi salam said when he went to the court of Fir'aun. He did not say Assalamu alaykum. He said, Assalamu, peace be upon the one who follows the right guidance. Okay, meaning if someone is a bitter enemy of Allah, you don't say Assalamu alaykum to them. You say, whoever follows the guidance, salam be upon them. So this person who is claiming to be an Islamic scholar, he is going and he's challenging another imam of a masjid, and he says, Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda. So he said, wait, do you not feel that you can say Assalamu alaikum to me? He says, well, I said what I said. Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda. Okay? So this type of stuff is unfortunately, so in the last 300 years of the Abbasid era, basically these debates started. And these debates, they became theater, and from that time on, it became a very, you could say, factionalism between the madhahib starts, okay? Everybody retreats to their corners, and they're coming out and they're fighting, and then they're retreating into their corner, and it becomes basically unpopular. You could get, if somebody from your group sees you studying at the halaqah of someone from the other side, you might get kicked out of your own group, okay? Almost becoming gang mentality. So basically, this is where it starts to go down. And another thing that happens is that they say, look, when they were doing the debates, right, in the earlier part, they started to debate on hypothetical issues. So imagine if for 100 years you are debating future issues. So eventually what's going to happen is that your imagination is limited. So you're going to run out on any future issues because you've already kind of foreseen and you've already discussed those issues. So now the scholars of the time, they say, look, there's no need for anyone to make new ijtihad anymore, because whatever we have found from the scholars before us is enough. They discussed everything that existed in their time, and they discussed everything they could imagine in the future as well. So there's no need for us now to talk about and to make ijtihad on issues outside of what has already been written. So basically they're saying, you can copy and paste, but you cannot write your own sentence based on your understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. And as a result, what happens is that the ummah starts to go down. The ummah starts to go down because remember, the scholars are supposed to be the leaders of the ummah in the sense that showing them the right way, showing them where we should be aspiring towards, right? Now, if the scholars themselves are infighting, putting each other down, trying to make themselves famous and popular by doing this type of stuff, then what's going to happen is that they're not going to be busy with actually solving the problems of today. They're not going to be busy with coming up with solutions for upcoming challenges. And as a result, if you remember that when Genghis Khan, when he came and he started to attack the Muslim world, you know what he said? He said, I am the punishment of Allah upon you. You guys have been doing so bad that Allah has allowed me to come and punish you through me. I'm going to do that now. And subhanAllah, that's where we start to see this madhab factionalism. Okay, madhab factionalism. Now, if you go online, you will see that from this time onwards, there was so much, you could say, negativity between the different madhahib and their followers and their students and whatnot, is that they would say that your salah behind an imam of a different madhab is not valid. You are Hanafi, he is Maliki, your salah is not valid. You are Maliki, he is Shafi'i, your salah is not valid. While we talked about the teachers themselves as great scholars, they were all students and teachers of each other. And they were very cordial with each other. But now, because of the politics of the time, they are becoming very, very factionalized. And unfortunately, I don't know about other countries, but I can tell you about where I come from in Pakistan. You're not just a Muslim. You're either a Deobandi Muslim. There's no masjid. It's either a Deobandi masjid or a Barelvi masjid or a Ahle Hadith masjid. And if you go and you talk to someone and you say, hey, how about if we don't do it this way, we do it this way? They say, wait, what are you? I'm Muslim. No. What are you? Tell us. We need to place you where you're coming from, and then we will deal with you the way we deal with everybody that comes from that. Meaning, we're not going to open our mind and discuss an issue and say, okay, you know what, maybe there's a better way of doing this. And as a result, people who go to one masjid, they only go to that masjid. And this is unfortunately happening in many other places in the world as well, where people have become very close-minded. So during this time, the scholars, the Hanafi scholars, they busy themselves with studying Hanafi fiqh more and more. Meaning they are organizing, compiling, explaining, but everything within their madhab. The Malikis are doing with Malikis, the Shafi'is are doing with Shafi'i, whatever is there. So they're not making new material. They're just working with old fatwa, old opinions, and they're just saying, okay, organizing and compiling and this and that. So as a result, what happens is, of course, the ball is going to get dropped. The ball is going to get dropped as to what other issues that are there. And that's why there were scholars, every generation that came up, and they said, hey, what you guys are doing is wrong. We have bigger problems to worry about. And until today, those scholars, you remember their names, you don't remember the names of the people who were just doing copy and paste. But the copy and paste guys, they always, they said that this person is a deviant. And this person is someone who deserves to be killed. And there were scholars who were basically, the other one would say, this person is wajibul qatl. Go ahead, anybody can go and kill this person because this person is saying that we need to open the door of ijtihad. And if you remember, in our History Maker series, we talked about a great scholar from India whose name was Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi. And Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi, basically, you could say he shook the Muslim world and challenged the scholars of the world. He said, what's wrong with you? Look at the situation we are in. We need to open the door to ijtihad. Everybody is saying there's no need for ijtihad. There's no need to take a fresh look at the problems that exist now. And as a result, what's happening is that the Muslim ummah is where it is. So this is the stage, what we call the consolidation stage, the fifth stage. And after this stage, the sixth stage is basically a decline. Okay, so once the Muslim ummah goes through this, where up until the early years of the Abbasids, that's the golden age of Islam. Okay, after that, the ummah starts to first plateau, then the Mongol attack comes. After the Mongols, the Muslim ummah is basically factionalized. Okay, there is an existent piece of the Umayyads in the Spain region. Then much of the Muslim countries are either under smaller dynasties, Seljuk, Fatimids, the Mamluks, and then the Ottoman Empire comes up. And then there's in India region, there are many small dynasties that are warring back and forth with each other. And at the end of it, basically, Muslim ummah slowly started to decline. And if you remember, we talked about a comparison of 2 points in history at some point, which is the invention of paper, or the discovery of paper by the Muslim world, and the discovery of the invention of the printing press, and the way that the Muslim world took it. When the first time, when it was in the early years of the Abbasid Empire, when they found paper with some Chinese prisoners who knew how to make paper, they immediately put them under royal guard, and they took them under protection to the Khalifa in Baghdad. And they said that these guys have some technology that we don't know. So they basically figured out a way to get that technology out of those prisoners. I don't know what they did, whether by hook or by crook. They got that technology from them, and the Muslims actually became the most prominent manufacturers of paper. Now, how did the paper benefit the Muslim ummah? Because paper is a tool of knowledge. Up until now, the writing materials are very limited, right? It's bark of a tree that doesn't last for so long. It's hard to move around, rocks, bones, stuff like that, right? Parchment, not so easy. Leather, not so easy. But paper, very easy. So they started to basically manufacture paper, and they started to use it for knowledge, and books and libraries filled up with paper. Now fast forward from that time to 700 years later, when the Gutenberg press is invented. This is the beginning of the European golden age. Up until then, Europe is in dark ages. Now this guy comes up with the printing press, which is now able to print. Up until now, if you wanted to copy the Quran, if you wanted a copy of the Quran, you had to go to someone who would literally write the whole Quran from beginning to the end for you by hand. But now this machine comes about, and once you set the plates and the imprint, now you can start to pop out multiple Qur'ans per day, hundreds in a month, and the same thing with other books like that. So what happened when this news came to the Muslim world, the Ottoman Empire, at this time they were in the state of closed-mindedness. The scholars, they saw that as a threat. And they said, if we allow this invention to come into the Muslim lands, what will happen is that any Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to pick up Sahih al-Bukhari, and he's going to say, let me give you a fatwa of my own. So we need to stop this. So for 100 years or so, the printing press is completely banned at all borders of the Ottoman Empire. After some time, one of the scholars, he petitioned the Khalifa. He said, we are losing out. We need to open the door to this. So they grudgingly allowed the printing press to come into the Muslim world, but they had three conditions with it. Three conditions with it. They said, number one is that nothing Islamic can be printed on this. Number two, nothing Arabic could be printed. So even if it's like a medical book, but if it's in Arabic, we don't want that to be printed on this because it will allow beneficial, advanced knowledge to go in the hand of an average person who may not understand and misunderstand it and start, like their fear was that if you print a book of medicine and you give it to some guy who has no knowledge of medicine, he's going to read and he's going to apply medicine without a license and without proper understanding the principles. He's going to kill people with it. Same thing with Islam. And the third condition that they made, I believe it was something to do with that Jews and Christians are allowed to print, or whatever the case was. So basically what ended up happening is that the Muslims could not print Islamic or Arabic books, but the Jews and Christians who were living in the Muslim empire, they started to print their books. And what ended up happening was that at this point, any time, whether you are the Khalifa, you are the greatest scholar of the Muslim world, or you are just an average person, if you needed to go see a doctor, you needed to go to a non-Muslim, because the doctors were missing from the Muslim world. There were no doctors. Engineers, if you wanted to build something nice, you needed to go to an engineer, but the engineers were not available among the Muslims. They were primarily Jews and Christians. And it became such that the most educated people in the Muslim world were non-Muslims, because they said, no, we don't need to. So it is said that the first printing press with like open printing, no restrictions on it, it came to Egypt on the ship of Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, and how old is Napoleon? That's like 300 years or so, right? Up until then, you could not openly just print any books or anything like that in the Muslim world. And as a result, basically, that how we see the downfall, we can trace it, that Islam teaches us that you don't just study Islamic sciences, but you stay up to date with knowledge. And I've been thinking about this whole artificial intelligence, right? Initially, whenever there's a new technology comes, there's a fear around it. However, what has to be done is that we have to change our mindset as to thinking, first we think why we should block this. But rather we should think about, okay, what are the guidelines that we need to put in place in order to benefit from it without getting the harm from it. So, Allahu Alam, I mean, that's not, I'm still thinking about this issue of artificial intelligence and how it can be beneficial in the Muslim world. Of course, this is the up-to-date, and every technology in the past when it came, if it was not, if someone did not use it, they ended up becoming outdated. They ended up becoming obsolete. However, sometimes those things that came about, they also brought about something very harmful and destroyed civilizations as well, right? So for example, again, that's another time. So So point being, with regards to the fiqh stage at this time, basically that's where it starts to go down, and after that the door to ijtihad is completely closed by the scholars, and they say no new ijtihad up until recent last 100 or 2 years, where people are now starting to argue that no, we need to open the door to ijtihad. We need to take a look at problems that we are facing with a fresh angle, If we don't do that, we're going to get lost back in time. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all the proper understanding. Of course, when we say the door to ijtihad being open, it does not mean the average person saying, okay, I'm going to sit tonight and make some new ijtihad, but rather this is for the scholars who are qualified to do so, but they cannot continue to just copy and paste. Wallahu alam. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant.